you sit down one night and you're like, I want to write a new script. How do you start?
The script that I wrote that has been produced, I co-wrote, that was very different than how I typically work, because that was the director called me and said, I have a script, can you give me notes on it? And I gave him a bunch of notes, and then he called me back and was like, would you be able to write this with me? Because he really liked the notes, and I think he was struggling to structure it and stuff like that, and was looking for help. When I gave him notes, I basically said, if I were doing a typical 3-act structure, these plot points, story beats, whatever, this is what I would do with it. These would be my sequences and stuff like that. When I write my own stuff, it's a very different process, and it tends to take a long time before I actually sit down to write, but then once I write, I usually write pretty quickly. Scripts for me, they either start with an idea, or they start with some kind of image that I find myself really drawn to, that a story starts to kind of come out of, and I will just think about it, while I'm in the car, if I go for a walk, if I'm riding my bike somewhere, if when I take my son to karate and I'm sitting there and the karate class is happening, I'll take notes on pen and paper usually, or I jot down ideas in the notes app on my phone, and I start to just generate a ton of ideas. I start to figure out who the characters are, what the world is, and things like that. Once all of that material coalesces, then you start putting together the this happens, this happens, this happens, right? And then I have all of that information that I've compiled, and I'll make playlists. So I'll listen to a bunch of music that is capturing the tone that I envision this piece having. And then I'll go for bike rides or take walks or just in the car, listen to the playlist and just come up with ideas. And a lot of it is based on who are these people, right? So it's there's some kind of plot, right? So there's an idea of what is happening. And then within that, it's who are these people? What world do they inhabit? And what kind of decisions do they make related to the things that are happening to them? And then everything kind of grows out of that. But then, of course, as you know, as someone who writes, when you start writing, the characters start becoming themselves on the page, and it's not always who you think they're gonna be. So then things start to change, right? They make different decisions than you think they would make, and you have to adjust a lot of stuff as you're going forward because you realize that some things don't necessarily work that you thought would work, or you don't exactly know where to put things that you wanted to use. And then there's the process, obviously, of the mechanics of screenwriting with your setup and payoff and stuff like that. So you'll come up with an idea halfway through a script, and then you'll be like, okay, I really like this, but then I have to go back and set it up so that it makes sense when it happens. There's this really great quote from, I'm not gonna remember verbatim the quote, but Paul Thomas Anderson, when he was talking about writing Magnolia, he said it was like ironing, where when you iron something, you go over a piece of it, and then you go over the next piece, but you have to go back over the previous piece too to smooth it out. So it's you've done one part, then you do the next part and go back and fix the.
Keep going.
So you're going forward, but also as you discover new material, you have to change what you've done to fit all that, and then that's just the first draft.
That's the first draft. So for me personally, I always struggle with the first draft because what happens is I'll write, 10 pages, right? And then I'll call it a day, and I'll come back to it the next day. And I'll reread it, and I'll be like, this is shit. I hate it.
You can't do that.
And,
no, you just
I'm
have
looking,
to keep
I'm
going.
like, the grammar isn't good. It doesn't flow. It doesn't read well. This character's dumb. This one is stupid. This doesn't make sense.
But in some of your scripts, they're supposed to be dumb. Right?
Yeah, and then I'll delete it.
No, you delete the whole thing?
And I restart. And it just takes forever.
You can't be
and
that
ever.
neurotic about it.
I know.
You
I am
just have to
really
plow
neurotic
forward.
about it. There's one time I was in film school and I was writing a feature. What I was writing, I thought was a thriller, like a straight up thriller. By the time we got reading it in class, everyone's like, this is a rom-com. And I'm like, oh shit, I didn't mean to do that. Now you could take it in a good way, oh, that's cool, a rom-com, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Or damn, my writing sucks. If I was trying to write a thriller and I wrote a rom-com.
Well, you just have to go with it and be like, yes, that is what it is. You are correct.
It's why does this character do all these stupid things? Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yes. I learned that from a very influential film critic.
From YouTube? Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard about that guy.
His name's Conter Landis.
Is he Danish or something?
He's something.
So, so I used to, even the first year or so we were in film school, maybe in the first 2 years we were in film school, I used to get an idea, have a basic concept of what it was, and just go and start writing and typing. I had a lot of trouble making things that felt complete. Even if I could write 120 pages and it had a beginning and a middle and an end, it didn't feel like a complete piece to me. Our final year of film school, our third year, I did a lot of outlining, character notes, stuff like that before I started writing.
Okay.
And I realized that things flowed much better
When you
and
planned
worked.
it out. Yeah.
And so I became like really obsessed with this process of like, it's almost like development in a way. Like my book, right? Right now I'm working on the second draft of my novel. I'm like 30 pages into the second draft. I owe the publishing company 100 pages in about 7 weeks. So I have 70 pages left. The very first idea I had for this book, I had in, I want to say like 2014, 2015.
Okay.
I started outlining it in 2016. So 9 years ago, I wrote like the first outline. But part of that is, part of it is the publishing company had a very specific idea of what they wanted it to be. And we had to figure out how to meet on that. Basically, like they had like, we wanted to kind of be this, this, and this. So it was, we had a lot of meetings over the course of like almost like 2 years, basically, where we talked about like, we kind of re-engineered the outline, created an act structure. Like I was kind of going more towards like cosmological horror and like I went in all these different directions that were not exactly what they were hoping it would be, basically. So we just had tons of discussions about what about this, what about this. So, but even still, I mean, and I actually just started outlining a script that I'm going to write once I turn in the 100 pages to the publishing company, because I'm assuming it's going to take them a couple weeks to read that.
Probably.
It's actually around the same time the original idea for this script dates to like 2016 or something.
Damn. I think we assume that everyone watching is involved in the film industry, or at least has some background in it, and that's probably completely wrong. It's just people who love movies and film and TV and actors and things like that. So I think it'd be cool from time to time to tell people our experiences with like writing, being on set, producing. You did some acting. We're not professionals by any means.
Okay, you want to hear something that I just found out today? I might be acting again.
Oh yeah, in the film. As a henchman?
So I'm going to Mexico in a couple weeks to watch the final 2 days of filming on the movie that I co-wrote with my friend. And he texted me today and he's like, by the way, you're playing one of the parts.
Uh-oh. So yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be really fun. But it's worth noting before we sign off on this that I have a full-time job, right? And I have kids, and I'm writing multiple projects simultaneously, and we have multiple YouTube channels and podcasts, and like, if I were like a full-time screenwriter, I would write a script in like a month, probably.
Crank a bunch.
Instead of like 9 years later, let me write this idea down.
All right.
That was a really good. That was a really good
it.
discussion question.